Who are the top running backs in fantasy football this year? I'm going to give you my top 30 and kind of go over each guy. Now, not too long or else this video will go on forever, but I'm going to explain each one and why I have them ranked where they're ranked. So let's get to it. So here we have the tier maker, and I'm sure everybody's seen someone do something like this, whether it be running backs, food, whatever it is. So we're going to go through each guy here. Now, we have the later rounds down at the bottom. I'm just going to go over these guys quickly. So we have the two Los Angeles running backs. I would prefer, honestly, Kamara Vidal out of those guys. I don't even want either one of those. I would not prefer Ezekiel Elliott. I would take Rico Dowdle, although I'm sure this is just going to be a nasty committee here. Tyler Algier, the guy who's going to see a big workload this year. Fade the noise. It's Bijan, right? He's a premium handcuff. Devin Singletary, not really interested in him. He's just outside my top 30. B-Rob, I do prefer him over Austin Eckler, which Austin Eckler is right there. And Chuba Hubbard, he's more of a early season fill-in because I believe Jonathan Brooks will probably start on the pup to start the year. I think that's everybody, right? There might be a guy or two that'll pop up that I'll put down there. But we're going to start. So 30. Now we're going to pretend that this is Zach Moss. This is Zach Moss. We're not going to pretend this is Zach Moss. We're going to pretend it's Chase Brown, though. Currently, I have Chase Brown ranked as my running back 30. Right now, it's early in camp still. He's been seeing a lot of reps with the first team. Now, it'll be interesting to see what happens in preseason if these guys are going to play. I'm assuming these guys will play. But it'll be interesting to see what the split is. I know Zach Moss is also listed as the RB1 on the depth chart. We'll just see how it plays out. I'm not going to adjust my rankings yet. So I have Chase Brown at RB29. Once again, and this can change as preseason progresses. All right, so we have running back 30. Now we're going to go to the running back 29. And this is where I have Raheem Mostert. Some people don't like where I have Raheem Mostert ranked because he was good last year. But for me, how likely is it that a guy of Raheem Mostert's caliber, a guy who really hasn't done a whole lot through his entire career, has a career year, has a ton of touchdowns, repeats at the age of 32. I think it's unlikely. I think Etienne will eat into the workload even more this year. I wouldn't be shocked to see Jaylen Wright honestly start to overtake Raheem Mostert because I believe they drafted him to be his replacement. So let's go to the next one, and that's going to be Tyjae Spears. Although I don't even know if Tyjae Spears is on here. Yeah, we're going to use Tony Pollard. Where's Tony Pollard at? I'm sure Tony Pollard's on this list. All right, Tony Pollard's here. I prefer Tyjae Spears over Tony Pollard. And the reason why is I think this backfield will be basically a split the whole year. But Tony Pollard had the opportunity last year to prove himself, and he didn't. He was so bad last year. He couldn't score touchdowns on the league's highest scoring offense. He was not good in fantasy football. In the limited sample size that we saw Tyjae Spears, he was really good. So I prefer Tyjae Spears over Tony Pollard. Once again, I think that's going to be a committee, but I think if there's a guy that can separate themselves as the season progresses, they'll see more of a, I don't want to say a workhorse workload, but we'll work up towards that and be really the guy on passing downs in the red zone. And I think that guy will be Tyjae Spears. All right, next on the list, we have Jaylen Warren. Now, I'm not going to lie. I really like taking Jaylen Warren at cost compared to Najee Harris. I do have Najee Harris higher in my rankings, but the thing with Jaylen Warren is that he was really their team's primary pass catching back last season. And now we have Russell Wilson, who checked the ball down at the highest rate amongst all starting quarterbacks last year. So for me personally, I look at this situation, and Najee will probably be the early down grinder, with Jaylen Warren being more the third down back, receiving back. He'll be the change of pace back. And this offense should be a lot better than what they were last year. And I don't want to say Jaylen Warren's better than Najee. I still think Najee Harris is a very solid running back. I think he's just been really unfortunate last year with injuries and just how bad this offensive line has been. So I really like both these running backs. I think that they can have value this season. Next on the list, we're going to go with Javonte Williams. And Javonte Williams is interesting because right now you have Sean Payton kind of talking him up. And this is what last year I was kind of interested, I would say, a little bit in Javonte because he was going around really the same range that he's currently going right now. But last year you could make a case that he was going to be good, obviously, because of the knee injury. He didn't have just the ACL tear. I want to say it was really everything. MCL, maybe even PCL. I don't know what all was in there, but I know that it was multiple ligaments. It could have been his whole knee. And we just don't see these guys come back like a clean tear ACL like Breece Hall, right? They don't come back as fast. So now another year removed. I do believe he will be, I don't want to say even workhorse back, but really the primary back on early downs, maybe even see some receiving work. So it's just, I don't know exactly what his role is going to be, and that's why he's here, but I am a little interested if he's there in the 8th round. Does pique my interest a little bit. Next on this list is going to be Aaron Jones. Now, Aaron Jones when he was actually healthy last year, he was not bad. The problem that I have with Minnesota right now is I'm just not buying into this Minnesota offense because I think this Minnesota offense could be closer to the bottom of the league. And the biggest reason why is just you have bad quarterbacks here. Now, I know some people are like, well, Sam Darnold, he could have a really good, like, Sam Darnold, are we joking? Like, what has that guy done his entire career? And then J.J. McCarthy, who I don't know if J.J. McCarthy is going to be really good as year one of being a pro. I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done with him. So I just really don't like this quarterback situation at all. You have a guy who's 29 years old, will turn 30 during the season. Like, these guys historically do not produce. So I'm really not interested at all in Aaron Jones. Another guy that I love James Conner from my hometown, repping the 814. But I just look at James Conner as well, and he was honestly pretty good last year for the time he played, but every single year he's averaging 4 games missed per year. They drafted Trey Benson in the 3rd round. Trey Benson, I really like him a lot as a prospect. So I think that, say James Conner misses time early on, I do, and like Trey Benson comes in and he balls out, I do think that there's a real chance that Trey Benson pushes him for work, and James Conner's not a true bell cow running back. So I'm just not really that interested in James Conner. I think he was very good last year, but Trey Benson will be more involved, and especially as the season progresses, I could see him really eating into James Conner's workload. Next, we have Zamir White. And Zamir White, like, there's a few running backs that give me the Alexander Mattison vibe, and he's definitely one of them. The other guy is Zach Moss, who actually is best comparable over on Player Profile, is Alexander Mattison. So for me, with Zamir White, he just gives me that vibe as well, where we're looking at a very small sample size from him last year. I want to say it was 5 games at the end of the year, and we're just saying, all right, this is what he's going to do for the rest of the year. The problem with Zamir White is that even dating back to college, he was never a receiving back. He only saw 2% of his team's target share. That's dreadful. That is awful. You have Dylan Laube kind of being the talk of camp right now as a guy who could be their primary receiving back. So I really don't think he's going to play on 3rd downs. I think he's going to be an early down grinder. And what you're going to have is a guy who's an early down back on a bad offense. Like, that's just not a recipe for fantasy success. Now, if you think that he's going to be a true workhorse, then go for it. For me personally, I just don't see it. And like, all these guys are pretty similarly ranked. We'll get to a little bit tier break up here, but the next guy on this list, I don't even see him on here. Yeah, I don't even see him on here. So we're going to use Chuba Hubbard, and we're going to pretend that this is Jonathan Brooks. Now, with Jonathan Brooks, right, it's really going to come down to, is he going to see work in training camp, or is he just going to be out for the entirety of training camp and then be on the pup? Because if that happens, honestly, I'd probably even move him down a little bit more. But if he at least practices a little bit and he's getting him work with a team and they do put him on the pup, I feel better about that he'll be back early in the season. And the other thing with Jonathan Brooks is, like, Jonathan Brooks, by far, once he steps on this field and he's healthy, he'll be the best running back on this team. So I think that he can be a player that early on might be a little bit frustrating because he's not going to see a whole lot of usage. But as the season progresses, I really do think that he can be this team's RB1, which will be valuable really for any running back that sees workhorse usage and is a very good prospect as well, which I think he is. I think he's a very good running back prospect. So he's kind of iffy, just like Chase Brown-esque, because we want to see what he's going to do in training camp, if anything. All right, next on the list, we have Dave Montgomery. And this is where I'm going to do a bit of a tier break. Now, I could put Dave Montgomery down here, but I do prefer him slightly because Dave Montgomery has one of the highest upsides of all running backs in fantasy football if Jahmyr Gibbs goes down. Now, I will say that he's like a premium handcuff, and I'm not really that interested in Dave Montgomery, I'm not going to lie, but I do recognize the true upside that if Jahmyr Gibbs goes down, like, you're looking at a guy who could potentially be, I really think that it'll be a top 5 running back if Gibbs were to go down. So there's a lot to like with Dave Montgomery, but the problem is if that doesn't happen, like, I just think his ceiling's so low. People say he's the red zone back. Last year, Jahmyr Gibbs was pushing him from work in the red zone. So for me, he's not a player that I really like to take because I like to shoot for the moon on these picks. But I do recognize that he has some potential upside. Next on the list, we're going to go with DeAndre Swift. Another guy that I just wish I knew how to kind of quit you, and really I should have been flipping this the other way around, but it's whatever. We'll start to do that now. But with DeAndre Swift, this offense, in my opinion, is going to be very good. I think that this Bears offense will be very good. But the problem with DeAndre Swift is he's never actually truly been the guy. Like in Philly, sure, he was solid, but really, like, I think he averaged around 13, 14 fantasy points per game, which is not great. But you could also say, like, he didn't see a whole lot of touchdowns because Jalen Hurts had him. But does this guy actually score touchdowns? Is he going to be a high touchdown kind of guy? Probably not. So I think that he's interesting, though, just because the offense, they paid him. They brought him in here. You do have Roschon Johnson, Khalil Herbert. We'll see how it goes. I think that, like, where he's currently going, though, is not very expensive for the potential upside that he offers. All right, next on this list, we have Najee Harris. Now, I do like Jaylen Warren. Oh, and we have Nick Chubb. I'm going to put Nick Chubb down here. I'm not really interested as of yet. We'll see what happens in training camp, but I'm going to put him right there. So Najee Harris, he's right here. All right, so Najee. The thing that I like about Najee is I think he's, I don't want to say underrated, but I think people hate on him a little bit too much because he was very good when this offense was actually good at the end of last season, where this offense was actually able to sustain drives. They were able to score points. And I think that's what's going to happen this year, where this team is going to get into the red zone. They're going to be at the goal line. He's going to be their primary goal line back. Arthur, there's been no team that has ran the football more over the past 2 seasons than the Atlanta Falcons. Arthur Smith, now OC for the Pittsburgh Steelers, was the head coach for the Atlanta Falcons. And no team has ran the football more in neutral game scripts than the Pittsburgh Steelers over the past 2 years. So I just think this is like a perfect marriage between these guys, Arthur Smith and Mike Tomlin, the Pittsburgh Steelers, where this is just going to be a very running back heavy squad where, once again, I think that him and Jaylen Warren can be viable options in fantasy football, with them potentially being high-end RB2s, one of them. So I like Najee Harris just because the touchdowns, but honestly, like at cost, sometimes I prefer Jaylen Warren, but I wouldn't even mind. I probably wouldn't take both of them, but in different leagues, I'll probably have a share of one or the other. All right, so next on this list, we have Rhamondre Stevenson. And Rhamondre's tricky, right? Because this offense does not project to be very good. And you also have Antonio Gibson, which is interesting because Rhamondre and Antonio Gibson are like redundant type players where they have the same skill set. They excel at third downs. But I do think that Rhamondre is a better pure runner than Antonio Gibson. And the other interesting thing is that they paid Rhamondre, right? So I just look at the situation. I don't know if he's going to be a true workhorse back, but I think that he can be pretty close. And like Antonio Gibson now going to a brand new team, I do like Rhamondre for where he's going, and I have drafted him a decent amount. So he's somebody that I don't want to say I'm fading. I'm not necessarily targeting because I usually go with like Rashee Rice and Jaden Reed in that range. But if I do go with a running back, he's typically my guy that I think is interesting right now. Next on this list, we have Kenneth Walker, another guy who I think is very interesting because Kenneth Walker, the biggest problem with him is just the receiving upside. And this is a brand new coaching staff that, yes, the old regime brought in Zach Charbonnet. Does this team still have ties to Zach Charbonnet? I think that Kenneth Walker is much better than Zach Charbonnet. Like all the efficiency metrics point to Kenneth Walker being a very good running back. Now, the problem is like college target share was not good either. We haven't really seen him command a high target in the pros too. So that's concerning because if he does lose the receiving work, like I'm not going to lie, he honestly does fit the mold of like a dead zone running back where there's just not a whole lot of projected receiving work. And then you also have to question, like, how good is this offense actually going to be? What are they going to even look like? Like, I think this offense is just very hard to predict as what's going to happen. But I just bet on the talent with sometimes with these guys, and I bet on him anytime that he's available in the 5th. I do find myself drafting him sometimes. So I do like Kenneth Walker. I really do. Next on this list, we have Alvin Kamara. And there's some question marks that I have with him because the efficiency has been going downhill. And I talk about this a lot. Bottom of the league last year. Bad offensive line. Efficiency metrics are taking a nosedive. Quarterback play, I don't think that Derek Carr is going to be able to mitigate that. So the quarterback play is just not going to be very good either. Like, I just really don't like this offense as a whole. I think this offense is may not be very good. So for me with Alvin Kamara, I can definitely see a world where he can finish as a RB1 because of the receiving upside that he offers, the amount of work that he'll probably command in this offense. But I do worry that the fall off for him is coming very soon. Looking at all the advanced metrics. So for me, I'd rather just be out on him at his current price than be in. Next on this list, and I moved it because I had to get a drink. We have James Cook and Joe Mixon. I'm going to talk like two at a time because I feel like this video is kind of dragging. But we're going to talk about James Cook first. And James Cook is interesting. I don't really like where he's currently going that much. Honestly, I don't take a whole lot of him. But I do see the flip side where right now you have an offense that has a ton of vacated targets. And usually what happens with vacated targets is there's not like a new number one guy unless he's already a proven number one guy. What happens a lot of time is like that year in Green Bay after Davante Adams left, all the targets kind of got distributed across everybody. And there was a slight uptick with the running back position. They get an uptick just because there's not a number one guy to really force feed the ball to. So they got to check it down a little bit more because there's just not that guy who can constantly beat the coverages. So what I think you could see happen is he gets an uptick in the receiving game. But the biggest problem that I have with James Cook is just the red zone work. Like last year, Latavius Murray had more red zone carries than he did last year. Josh Allen's always a threat. I think that Ray Davis could potentially be involved. And the next Joe Mixon, just up there in age, but I do think that he can be a workhorse on one of the league's best offenses. So he's intriguing, but once again, the age is getting up there. A lot of career touches. Next, we have Josh Jacobs, and I kind of view him similar to Joe Mixon, but the issue is that I think Joe Mixon will be a true workhorse, every down kind of guy. Where we've seen LaFleur use a committee approach here, but they did bring in Jacobs, which has me... I don't know if I want to believe that Josh Jacobs is going to be a true workhorse back. I could see it potentially, but I could also see like Marshawn Lloyd being involved a little bit on third downs or something. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, but I will say that Josh Jacobs, like if you're looking at a running back in the third, he's not bad. He's not a bad pick. Next, we have Rachaad White. And for me, Rachaad White is just, I don't think he's very good, but that doesn't really matter in fantasy if you see a lot of volume. And last year you saw a lot of volume. And now you have Bucky Irving here. But the problem with Bucky Irving is that like, it's kind of the same with, I forget who I said it with earlier, but it's like redundant skill sets. Rhamondre Stevenson and Antonio Pierce. Honestly, Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard. And it's the same with like Bucky Irving and Rachaad White, where these are two more primary, I don't want to say primary, but receiving backs. And so it's just Rachaad White, that's kind of where he excels in the receiving game. So is Bucky Irving really going to be able to push him in that area? Whereas this was like somebody who could be more the early down kind of guy, then I would be a little bit worried for Rachaad White because of his workload, where I don't know if Bucky Irving's honestly going to push him or not. But still, I'm not taking a whole lot of Rachaad White because I just don't think he's good. And that if that volume falls off a little bit, he's not going to, I just don't think he's good enough to make up for it. So next we have Derrick Henry, and this might be kind of a hot take, but I just don't really, I'm going to put Derrick Henry here. Yeah. Derrick Henry's going to go here. Yes. So the problem with Derrick Henry is just 30 years old. Yes, he's going to a really good offense, but if you believe that Derrick Henry is going to have this monster season, then you need to go over to the sports books, and take his over, where right now it's like 950 rushing yards and 10 touchdowns. Because if you do the math on that, that's not very good for fantasy, because the biggest problem for him is just the receiving upside. There's no receiving upside in this offense. So you have no receiving upside, where if the touchdowns don't go quite his way, which we anticipate, maybe he's not used that much, which I don't even think he's going to be a true workhorse in this offense. I think they're going to conserve him as the season progresses and keep him healthy for the playoffs, because this team has Super Bowl intentions, right? So I just don't think that he's going to be this guy who's going to touch the ball 30 times a game. He might be a close to 20. I wouldn't even be shocked if they keep it right under 20 to keep him healthy throughout the year. So I just don't really like Derrick Henry for where he's currently going. There's other guys that I prefer. And one of those guys is actually Isaiah Pacheco, who's going right around him. And Isaiah Pacheco will be a true workhorse back. He'll be a guy who's involved on third downs. And he plays on one of the league's highest scoring offense that I think is going to score a lot of touchdowns. It could honestly be one of the best teams in the NFL offensively this year. Now we're gonna get into the next tier. And Kyren Williams, there's some question marks there with the Blake Corum, although I wonder how much of that were really kind of overestimating, and he ends up just being a smash pick in the second round. But another guy like Rachaad White, that I know he was super efficient last year, I just don't believe that he's actually that good. I think it's Sean McVay's system, and we've seen running backs in Sean McVay's system be very good for fantasy football purposes. I mean, Darrell Henderson was fantasy relevant. Royce Freeman for a little bit was fantasy relevant. So I just think that there's guys that can produce in this offense, and Blake Corum can maybe come in here and eat a little bit of the workload away. All right, next we're going to do Travis Etienne. And I'm not really as concerned as some other people are with Tank Bigsby. Like, Doug Peterson said this last year, and it did not happen. Like, I kind of fell into the trap a little bit last year with this. And this year, I'm not doing it. So I don't think that Tank Bigsby is going to be a factor. I don't really care about the second half of the season collapse. With Travis Etienne, the efficiency, was a bit of a concern last year. I don't even care really about the efficiency. I just think the offensive line wasn't very good. They had so many injuries along that offense. I mean, Trevor Lawrence was banged up. Christian Kirk missed time. Zay Jones, they didn't have receivers. And now I think that they've added enough pieces to this offense. They had Mitch Morse. They had Gabe Davis. They had Brian Thomas, speed on the outside, that I think it's going to, I don't even want to say open things up. I just don't think that they're going to overwork him in the first half like they did last year. He's still going to be a workhorse, and maybe Tank Bigsby sees a little bit of work, but still a workhorse on an offense that I think can really improve this year. The next guy on this list is a guy that I personally love to draft, and that's Achane. Yes, he's a bit risky, I would say, because of his size. Really, that's the biggest thing, is his size. Not very big, so he's at a risk to get hurt. I would say a little bit higher than other players. But here's the thing, is when he's on the field, he's going to put up massive fantasy points. Last year, in 9 full games that he played in, 7 of those 9 games, he scored double-digit fantasy points. In 5 of those 7 games that he scored double-digit fantasy points, he had over 20 fantasy points. The dude is so explosive. He was the most explosive running back in the NFL last year with at least 100 total touches, one of the highest running backs in missed tackles forced per touch. Couldn't talk. So the dude is just very good at football, and as long as he's on the field, I really think in the second round has one of the highest ceilings of all the guys in the second round, as long as he's on the field. Next, really 2 guys that I view so similar. I'm going to put Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor. It's just, these guys, I think that their ceilings are somewhat capped just because the mobile quarterbacks with them. Jalen Hurts, 3 years starting quarterback, double-digit rushing touchdowns in those 3 years. Now, the one caveat is you don't have Jason Kelce here, so are they still going to be able to do the tush-push? I don't know. But I know that he's a threat to score anytime they get in close. Next guy, Anthony Richardson. I mean, I think he had 4 rushing touchdowns in 4 games last year or something, in 3 games or whatever it was. So the dude is always going to be a threat to score in the red zone as well. So I just think that they're capped a little bit. You also have mobile quarterbacks that don't check the ball down at a high rate, so they're somewhat capped. The next 4 guys on this list are as follows. So first, we're going to have Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs, to me, can be the RB1 in fantasy football. I talked about this when I talked about Dave Montgomery, that later in the season, once Dave Montgomery came back from injury in week 10, Jahmyr Gibbs was pushing him for more touches, more red zone touches, which was really Dave Montgomery's thing last year. And if that continues, Gibbs only eats into that more the workload, especially around the goal line. He's the team's primary receiving back. Detroit Lions, over the past 2 or 3 years now, have averaged the most fantasy points per game at the running back position. This is a team that uses their running backs around the goal line just so well for fantasy football purposes. So I think that there's a realistic chance that he can be the RB1 in fantasy football. And the next guy on this list, a guy that I know people are not going to like that I'm putting up here already, and that's going to be CMC. I personally am not on the CMC train this year. Now I know that may be contrarian and maybe is not a good take, but here's the problem that I have with CMC. I don't even have a problem with CMC. I just like the other guys, the younger running backs better. And the main reason is 28 years old. Really everything has gone right for him over the past 2 years. That doesn't usually happen for these running backs that are seeing big workloads. For San Francisco last year, everything went right for that offense. So I think he's one of the safest picks in the first round, right? He has a ceiling that few running backs can have. But he didn't have that ceiling before he had that ceiling. Maybe that sounds a little bit stupid, but Breece Hall, we don't know what his true ceiling is. I mean, he was RB2 last year in points per game or in PPR leagues on the league's worst offense. We don't know what his ceiling is. We don't know what Bijan Robinson's ceiling is. He didn't get a full workload last year. So for me, the next 2 guys, I'm going with Bijan at number 2, and I'm going with Breece Hall. For these two guys, like I'm taking Breece Hall, RB1 in my drafts. Once again, I just talked about it. Coming off a torn ACL last year, on the league's worst offense, scoring offense last year, he was still RB2 in PPR leagues. I think with Aaron Rodgers, this should elevate the offense, probably be closer to the middle of the pack, maybe even borderline top 10 in terms of efficiency, scoring offense. I really like him. And then Kirk Cousins here is going to do wonders for this team in Atlanta. Also, Zach Robinson, offense coordinator, new coaching staff. Or wait, is he the head coach? I think he's the OC. Anyways, I think he's going to do wonders for this team as well. So this is my tier rankings. Let me know what you all think. Who's too high? Who's too low? Make sure to hit that subscribe button, follow, whatever it is. I appreciate you all. See you on the next one. Peace.